Hello, welcome to the Chief Wellbeing Officer podcast. This is episode 44 and it's great to be back. Slightly different. We're back with a spring-summer season. I've got 6 fantastic guests lined up and we're going to look in depth at how we can emerge from the pandemic, use wellbeing, design a better way of doing things, a better way of working, a better way of living. And this first episode 44 in the Chief Wellbeing Officer series is with Stephen De Souza, and a great way to start. You know, I've just finished a conversation with Stephen. My plan was always to come out on the bike for a ride over beautiful Barcelona as soon as I was finished, and it fits in perfectly with his last point on what we need most of all coming out of the pandemic. If there's one thing in my conversation with Stephen that really hit home as I was climbing up this mountain was reconnection. You know, reconnection with ourselves, reconnection with our learning journey, reconnection with well-being and how we can lead ourselves better and how we can think about even the connection with nature that we have around us. So Stephen is a really deep thinker. He's worked with leading organizations, leading corporate companies, leading academic institutions, and he doesn't work per se in well-being, but a lot of what he talks about in this interview in terms of leadership, in terms of how we can, be better ourselves, how we can strive to be curious, strive to keep learning, go for breadth and depth of experience. I think we can all look at those aspects and those themes within the theme of well-being. So in terms of deepening our own understanding of well-being, this is a fantastic conversation with Stephen. It's great to be back, and enjoy, and we'll see you very soon for the remaining 5 episodes in spring summer for Chief Wellbeing Officer. Thanks again. Bye-bye. Ciao. So hello, welcome to the Chief Wellbeing Officer podcast. Stephen, where are you in the world today? What are you working on?
So I'm in London, Ealing, and I'm in the middle of a work day. My day is every day is different. So one morning it might be working with CEOs and looking at something around the changing culture for the firm. And the next day it might be just coaching an individual or helping develop like a talent strategy for an organization. So that diversity, I think, would be more reflective rather than a BAU day for me currently.
Yeah, keeping you nice and busy, I imagine. How's your own personal journey been, or personal and professional journey been the last couple of years during COVID?
It's 2 things. One is the professional journey was quite distinct in that I was living abroad and in Romania, because I wanted to experience a different culture, a different environment to the norm. So I wanted to almost shake it up a little bit and have a bit sense of aliveness. I remember it was a silly Facebook meme that you often see where they show pieces of paper. So one said, your doctor has just told you have 6 to live. Oh, but then what would you do? And then what 3 things would you regret not having done in your life? And then, oh, by the way, it's a misdiagnosis. And one of the things I would regret is not having the opportunity to live abroad. I spent a few months in Indonesia, but it was never the experience of living a long term abroad. So I just booked a one-way ticket to Bucharest, and I spent 2 years as that was my home, just learning from a different culture that I really admire, the entrepreneurship and the nature of that country.
Have you thought about how that experience has changed your approach to your profession? Has it brought any new layers into what you do now or have done since you lived there?
It's made me think that, when we're talking about always learning, how easy it is to become out of touch and default to what I already know, and how the sparks of creativity are often in other places and in another generation. Almost, I hate to say it, there's things we can contribute. Like I helped them, for example, in thinking about pricing, and there was a games company and they made games for corporations, and they had great products, but no pricing strategy or no commercial strategy. So helping them think through this. But in terms of their inventiveness, I think there was this ability to learn from each other. But so I am always struck by them as a challenge to my own fixed mindset in a way, and
Yeah.
how can I always be surprised, and yeah, and it gives me a lot of faith actually when we talk about people often almost dismissive of younger generations and work shy, always independent, looking for only for meaning. But I think there's a huge energy and contribution and innovation that I'm seeing, and for me, definitely a challenge and a wake up call. How can I stay connected to that, and
Exactly.
how can I support as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Great points. I first got to know you in the world of executive education. So as a teacher and then also as an author, and we'll touch on that in a second. Um, Now you're a client partner and a consultant, and you've worn many hats over the years. How would you describe yourself? And even in terms of, would you view yourself as a specialist or an expert or more as a generalist? What's your views on that?
Yeah, I would say a generalist, Stephen. But there's a book written called The Neo Generalist. I think you might know the co-authors. Richard Martin is one of the co-authors. He's the editor for the last few books I've done. And the idea here is that, the world, yes, we need specialists, but to be effective, we need to be able to converge ideas and be able to span boundaries across different disciplines. So, an expert in my way, I've gone through a career transition from originally training as a priest to working in a startup, to being a hotel manager, to working in a charity, to heading diversity in a retail bank, then investment bank, and then all sorts of different, and then working in executive education, as you said, and FMCG, and now in management consulting. Very different sectors, but I seem to have developed an expertise in the sector I'm in, or in the topic I'm in, that being able to shift across as a generalist, so it's not limited. So the idea here is it's more a sense of, I think it's Latin, she called it, being the serial expert. When she wrote a book for her children and she wanted to describe the future of careers, she said it's not about remaining or being a generalist where you don't have any expertise, but it's about being an expert. And then in a few years, moving and being an expert in something else, and then moving and being an expert in something else. So you're able to take deep domain expertise. In my case, it was in the field of leadership or organizational development, similar to you, Steve. And then how do you build that in another sector, or how do you cross it to another area? And the way I've tried to do is broadening within my field. So training, for example, as a psychotherapist, not being a psychotherapist, it wasn't my intention, but I did 3 years training to understand what are those skills needed and what is it that I, and in my own development that'll be useful in service of my clients or who I work with.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I think, and you're right. I do know the co-authors on that. Kenneth Mickelson, actually, I
Yes.
interviewed him on a previous episode of Chief Wellbeing Officer a couple of years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
and coming from a design thinking background myself, which in
Mm-hmm.
essence is a kind of archetypal generalist area of study, and I've long been convinced of the value of that, but still trying to still attain that rigor and depth as you go through. And I think even compared to some of your previous comments before touching on this theme, it very much fits this approach with that learning journey. Staying humble, being curious, being inspired by the next generation, right? And then you add that to the store of the different positions that you fill during that journey, and it enriches those. And whether you call that teaching
Curiosity.
or whatever, right? It's
How
interesting.
do you do that? How do you stay curious, and how do you stay fresh in your thinking?
I think it's trying to listen to different perspectives. And as you talked about, not having that fixed mindset. So just asking even the same question, but to so many different people, and from all different areas, generationally, geographically, culturally, and seeing what aligns, what doesn't align, and I've always just been fascinated with trying to synthesize things which look so different at first glance, and saying, well, actually, what is the pattern here? And that motivates me to see if there is. And sometimes there isn't, and I just throw it out, but then it inspires me to keep going forward and seeing if there is a way to connect the dots. That's what I've tried to do over the years, right? I think this fits great with your fantastic trilogy, Not Knowing, and I've used one. I used the cover of your book in one of my sessions over the years, and I loved it. And it was about talking to leaders about the importance of humility, and talking like the end of expertise. You don't always have the answer. And I loved the little phrase that you had in Not Knowing, which was about, let's find out together. We don't know the answers, and me as a leader, I can pretend that I have the answer, but I can create that safe space. I can be vulnerable and say, look, well, I'm an orchestrator. Let's find out together. So Not Knowing came out 2014, right? And then it was Not Doing 2018, and then Not Being just earlier this year or last year.
2021. Yes, exactly. Last quarter, 2021.
Yeah. So talk me through that. Was that planned, the trilogy, or did that just emerge as after you did Not Knowing, and how did that start? I'm just interested in this whole series.
I think it started from my own relationship with the unknown, which was terrible. So I remember always being my therapist saying, Stephen, you're always living in polarity. Should I do this or should I do this? And that tension between the two. So I had a very difficult relationship with the unknown. And one time I had a colleague, and his name's Randy. I think he wrote a book called Relax, It's Only Uncertainty. And Randy made a distinction. He said, normally when people talk about the unknown, they always conflate it with uncertainty. But uncertainty is only one feeling in response to the unknown. So if you think about children at Christmas or Eid or another celebration of some kind, the present might be wrapped. Now, the child doesn't feel uncertain. They feel curious. They feel excited. They feel full of wonder. They might even sneak and try and find something and wrap it. But they certainly don't feel uncertain. And so what I became curious about was those who relate to the unknown, not as a place of uncertainty, but as a space of opportunity. So together with my co-author, Diana Renner, I met her on an executive leadership program. We were both participants. We interviewed people people like artists, adventurers, scientists, explorers, entrepreneurs, who did view the unknown as a space of opportunity. And that became really the first book, Not Knowing. And the key thing in this book, message for the viewers or listeners, is it wasn't about adding new skills to your toolkit, as it were. It was more around taking things away. So this unlearning, and that we often hear in our field, Steve. We used the language of the poet Keats. And he wrote a letter to his brothers, George and Thomas, which he described this phrase called negative capability. He was comparing Shakespeare to Coleridge. One he felt was innovative and creative and life-giving. One he thought was more descriptive, Coleridge. But the negative capability described as the ability to be with mystery, uncertainty, and doubt, without irritable reaching after fact and reason. And from this, we made really four themes emerged, and that enabled leaders to be more comfortable in the unknown and to create opportunity. A specific example is empty your cup. You've heard the phrase often, this idea of the beginner's mind, but the use of it in business is quite profound. So you can look at microcredit or microfinance, and they all grew exponentially in areas, let's say Africa or India, in these cases, where there was no existing path dependencies. They didn't need to do the same learning curve as others who'd gone through other forms of communication or banking. The same with the founder of the Grameen Bank, Mohammed Yunus. When he said he started his bank, he said he looked at what conventional banks did and he did the opposite. They went to the men, he went to the women. They went to the rich, he went to the poor. They were owned by those owned by the people. He said he could do these things because he knew it. Now, I never pretend that we're the tabula rasa. So I get executives to recognize, for example, what they do know, but they also make space for what they don't know. And there's different ways to practice that. One is just by, for example, asking more questions or staying with questions longer. So at school, if a child asks, 2 or 3 questions, the teacher's really suspicious, that child's got ADD or attention deficit, they need to be put on some medication. And as adults, we rarely ask 2 or 3 questions about something. It's seen as obnoxious but actually, this is a way to go deeper, a way to show our curiosity and our aliveness. So the book is giving almost like a shifting the mindset or the emphasis on this idea that we need to have the knowledge, as you said, and the reality in a world that we have, millions of people acting predictably and unpredictably, irrationally and irrationally. There's no way that we can have all the answers.
Not doing, not being. What was the change there, briefly?
Right.
And then, if there was a fourth, what would it be?
When we wrote the book, we thought, okay, there's knowing, but there's a model of leadership, which is basically the 3 components in what leaders know, do, and be. So attending to knowing is vital and foundational, but then there's doing, and then there's being. So that's what set Deanna and I on that path to write Not Doing, which was really an antidote to the constant pressure to be in action, to be pushing, to be striving, to be pulling. And instead of pushing and pulling, what did it mean to work with the system? What did it mean to flow? What did it mean to explore other ways, such as pausing, for example, or active surrender rather than passive surrender? So it was more an exploration. And I think that was super relevant because it wasn't yet the COVID pandemic, but there was a pandemic almost of exhaustion.
Yeah.
And it's still become endemic, I think, in modern life for many people, and always feeling exhausted. And what is the way out of this? And at least a way that we can support ourselves feeling like this. So this is what Not Doing explored, and it was predominantly influenced by Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which stands for effortless action. What does it mean? And so that's the inquiry really that we explored. And the last book, Not Being, to complete the trilogy, I worked with another young co-author called Kuyen Bui. I hadn't met him in person, but I'd just seen some of his posts on Facebook. And I saw they were very original and thoughtful, and a young man in his 20s, never written a book before. And so I collaborated with him to write Not Being. And this really is at the heart of all change and transformation. And I think it's the question of identity. So it's who do we say we are, or who do we conceive ourselves to be? And rather than atomized individuals, we're always trying to protect, defend, extend. How do we recognize our identity is fundamentally entangled with each other and with the natural world? So, for example, I interviewed a scientist called Tom Oliver, who's an ecologist. He's written a book called The Self-Delusion, that literally he'll talk at the microscopic level, how most of our cells are non-human, that we have 33 billion cells of bacteria, and more than human cells. And just the exchange of atoms with other elements of the universe continually. But the science is strong, and but the book looks at these questions when how does it impact your life, and what happens when your story falls apart. In terms of well-being, you may be having this situation where life is normal, and then it's punctured by COVID, or it's punctured by another event, and our story falls apart.
And I think some of those things that you mentioned in Not Being, it fits perfectly with my next question on the link with well-being. So for many years now, and certainly within this show, the main objective is to look at well-being and to try and elevate that as a more strategic concern. So not something that is very soft and very much at the margins of how we work. And I think a lot of your work, even though, you know, maybe you don't call it well-being, I think it fits with some of the things that I've looked at over the years in terms of even the, you know, that not knowing example within some of the leadership training that I did, the importance of humility, beginner's mindset, and things like that. Have you thought about well-being yourself? I don't know, maybe even personally through, you know, COVID years, but specifically in terms of your career and the work that you do with executives and leaders. What's some of your views on well-being? Just keeping that nice and open, and then maybe we zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, I was being challenged, like working, long hours. I've often let my health suffer, and often developed bad practices or habits that haven't supported well-being. So, for example, not actively exercising, or nutrition not being as strong as it could be, or as healthy as it could be. So one of the ideas recently is I had somebody saying, if you can't be a CEO or leader of your company, if you can't even be the CEO of your own well-being and the leader of your own well-being. And it really struck me as true. If I can't prioritize my own health and my own body that I inhabit and I bring with me, and it literally allows me to function, then I'm not going to be effective to any other person or in my work. So a shift in my mentality over the last few years, and particularly emphasized, I think, by COVID, is what I do to become much more conscious of my own energy, my own health and well-being. And for me, that meant prioritizing exercise. It means prioritizing walking daily. It means prioritizing just these micro habits, really, that keep me well. The second part is recognizing that I don't need to put off relaxation to a future date. So we always have this idea, I'll relax when I'm on, a weekend break, and I remember saying that to my therapist once, that I was exhausted, and he said to me, why don't you take a holiday now? And I said, what? I can't. It's not till then. So just put your hands behind your head, stretch your legs out. I invite the listeners to do this as well, and who are watching and recording, and just take a deep breath and a sigh. And let out, just allow yourself to have almost like a 30-second vacation.
On the beach.
No, it's not long, but it allows your body to relax, allows yourself just to give yourself, taking away the tenseness in your body where you may be holding yourself, maybe shoulders arched over, above the keyboard. Nice. And just allows you just a few minutes of rest. Obviously, some people do stretching, some people do other activities, but the point is that it's not something that well-being is something that we can delay into the future, but it's how might we experiment with a way of doing that now.
Absolutely.
And the third part is this whole reframe around exhaustion and meaning and work. So I don't know, you probably know, Steve, who said the quote, but the cure for exhaustion is not rest, it's wholeheartedness. And when I heard that for the first time, I thought, wow, because I thought when I'm wholehearted, when I'm fully engaged, I don't feel exhausted. I feel quite energized and quite, so it's how do I, when I'm noticing my exhaustion, I question, am I feeling divided? Am I being wholehearted? Am I really present? Or am I, is my mind elsewhere? How might I bring my values in conflict? How might I bring more wholeheartedness to where I am now, who I'm with? Yeah. And that takes away this sense of exhaustion. And so those are the three things I would offer listeners.
The whole idea behind rebooting this podcast now is that I feel that we're coming out of the tunnel of COVID. Are we going to reset sufficiently? Are we going to take advantage of the opportunity that we have in terms of the world of work? Or are we just going to copy and paste the broken, non-perfect system that we had before? Moving ahead now, and I hope that we are coming out, and we will continue with much societal disruption, that's in no doubt, I think. But I hope that you talk about being energized and wholehearted, and I hope that there's a lot of people around the world moving forward now with that real belief on starting afresh. what do we need? What's the one thing that we need more than most to kind of move forward and design a better way of doing and design a better way of being?
What came into my head is something very practical, and that's just more time in nature. I'm conscious of your plant there, Steve, bringing the natural world into the office, as it were. In front of me is like a lovely green tree that's full of spring, and I think there's something that we need right now, which is one, connection with the natural environment, and two, almost like this sense of renewal and regeneration that it gives, and three, the sense of groundedness and being in touch with our bodies, being in touch with our environment, being in touch with each other. And I think just spending, even if it's a few minutes a day out in the park or taking a walk or being in as natural environment as you can find if you're in a city, but super, super helpful. And I think that's what we need. And for those three reasons that I just gave, and I think it's a starting point of renewing our own bodies, our minds, our spirits, and allowing us to go forth. I think that's what I would say.
Brilliant.
Surprising answer. I didn't think I would say that. So that's it.
A final one to finish. I've been inspired. Good friend of mine a couple of years ago talked about desert island discs, and I subsequently put it into the daily reset as one of the nudges. And I've done it myself as a time machine, right? Those songs that represent your life. I'm going to ask you for one song, Stephen, one song that means something to you and why. Just briefly, and then we'll play that on the way out. What one is it?
So I'm going to choose Vincent by Don McLean. And I like it because it almost like it creates the starry sky. You see it in that, you feel the melancholy of Vincent. You feel his humanness as well, and his creativity, and what he wants to do, and in the world. And so this song, to me, he's like almost like an archetype, a perennial character. That's why he's so beloved. It's misunderstood. I think he had a tragic end, but there was something about his productivity, prolificity, or just this desire to live his message and desire to create his work. That even though he didn't earn during his lifetime, but that wasn't his main concern. It was to do his work. And I think that's, and it still touches us. We can see that in his vibrant colors and in his spiral style. Many years later, there's the book, I think it's called Lust for Life, that I recommend listeners to read. And it just it's almost like it's told of his life in his own type of words and beautifully written. But yes, that's the song. And I can say Don McLean, for that's probably my teenage years with American Pie, and
yes, I remember it.
The album, but brilliant song. That and I think Vincent is a good model for connecting with our creativity and producing something, giving our lives to our work.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining the podcast today, Stephen, and wishing you well in the future. Thank you very much.
Starry, starry night, paint your palette blue and gray. Look out on a summer's day with eyes that know the darkness in my soul. Shadows on the hills,